There is a very famous name in Canadian politics, and it belongs to the man beside me, Raymond Chretien. Now, he wasn't really in politics. That's kind of a trick question. It was his uncle, known as the Shawinigan Fox. And Raymond Chretien is also from Shawinigan and joins us to talk about many things, including the American election. Mr. Chretien, please tell your uncle that I promoted his book.
I will do this with pleasure, Alan. It's a pleasure to be with you, Alan. We go back a long way together.
Well, it's very nice to speak with you. And let me just say, out that window there, and I know there's a lot of sun in your eyes, but out that window there is a beautiful picture of Mount Royal. And this is emblematic of the cultural divide in this country. You have a nice mountain in Montreal. We have ravines in Toronto, and we go down into them. So, you know, c'est une autre paire de manches à Toronto.
Exactly. Still, Montreal is a great city to live in. Go ahead.
Now, you have such a famous name and you were ambassador to America, but let's start with your trajectory. Where did you go to school? And writing the Foreign Service Officers exams and being a career diplomat, where were you posted? Please fill us in.
Listen, I was born in Shawinigan in 1942, therefore I'm a young 78 years old. I did my secondary education in Shawinigan, Joliette, and then I went to Laval University in Toula. I became a lawyer in the summer of 1966, but then I decided to join the Foreign Service of Canada as opposed to practicing law. So I wrote the bar exams in case I wouldn't like it in Ottawa, but I was so much in love with this profession of diplomacy early on that I never looked back, never came back to Montreal until I retired from the public service. So I was trained as a lawyer, but I've been a diplomat, of course, for almost 40 years, and a happy one.
And where were you posted, and what were your assignments?
My assignments were very diversified. Of course, in Ottawa, I had the usual trajectory, but I was promoted quite young, quite fast. I became, in 1978, the youngest ambassador in the history of Canada, but previously had assignments in the permanent mission of Canada to New York, and then Beirut, Lebanon, between 1972 and 75, Paris as a counselor between 75 and 78, until I was appointed ambassador with the support of my mentor, Alan Gottlieb, to the Congo in 1978. That was the beginning of my ambassadorial career.
Now, so many of your colleagues would say something very similar to what you said, that it was exciting, it was compelling. And frankly, I've said that too. And all I did was get to work with some of you on post and in Ottawa. What is so compelling about the Canadian Diplomatic Corps?
I'm not sure it's the same right now, but in those days, remember, the Foreign Service of Canada, the Department of External Affairs was certainly one of the powerful departments in Ottawa. Finance, External Affairs were perhaps the two, I wouldn't say privileged, but strongest departments in Ottawa. Therefore, when I joined in 1966, the Canadian diplomacy was still highly respected, dynamic, and recruiting some of the best students from across the country. I remember when I joined in 1966, we were perhaps 50 or 55 out of a crowd of 10 times more. Hundreds of people would apply from everywhere in the country. So it was a strong group of young men, young women, between age 25 and 28, 29, willing to devote their life to the service of Canada, to the service of Canadian diplomacy, when Canada had a big role to play in the world. Stronger then than it is now.
Now, top of mind, please, Mr. Chretien, the interesting people you met, the unusual circumstances you found yourself in, and places you were. Anything come top of mind that you would share with us?
Very, very quickly. First of all, the permanent mission in New York, that was in 1967. This was the glorious days of the United Nations, when the great speakers of the world would come and address security issues, war, what I call war and peace issues. Lord Carrington, Abba Eban would regularly be the kind of speaker that, as a young diplomat, you could hear talking about the ins and outs of international crises. So that was, for me, my training in multilateral diplomacy. I moved from there to have my second assignment in Lebanon, in Beirut, a post that really changed my life. The Middle East is, as you know, is a very difficult part of the world to understand. Tensions have been high for a long, long time. So I was there for 3 years, including when there was this the 73 war that's between Israel and neighboring Arab countries, including Syria. The greatest battle in the history of mankind took place on the Golan Heights, just 70 miles from where I was living in Beirut. So for me, Beirut has been a place where I learned the politics and diplomacy of the Middle East, and to this day, it is helpful to me. Once you have mastered the politics of the Middle East, the rest becomes easier.
It is said that your uncle, Jean Chretien, Prime Minister Chretien, moved to Ottawa barely speaking any English, but learned there on the job as an adult. Is that roughly true?
Yes, you know, Jean, of course, he's my uncle, but he's a young uncle. You know, I'm 78 years old. I think that Jean is 86 now. He's an uncle by blood, but because he would spend a lot of his time, parts of his summer, with my parents at our cottage near Shawinigan, who became more like brothers. He's an uncle by blood, but like a more elderly brother relationship. It's true. I was raised in a more bilingual environment, perhaps than Jean. But he mastered it. You know, Jean went to Ottawa as a young, ambitious, politician. I've been interested in politics for forever. And he mastered English pretty well. Maybe not the best accent, but he always managed to make himself understood in a magnificent way.
Let's just say he has a distinctive accent.
Totally, in both French and English.
And what I was leading up to was your great facility in both English and French, and I didn't realize it until I was preparing to talk to you today, Spanish. So you are fluent in 3 languages, n'est-ce pas?
Por supuesto. I was ambassador of Canada to Mexico, as you know, for 3 years, from between 1985 and 1988. This is where not only did I learn Spanish, but I also learned about the great cultural, historical background of Latin America, of Mexico. I became very interested in the affairs of the southern hemisphere as well. And this assignment in Mexico proved to me to be extremely valuable for the rest of my life. I was in Mexico when Canada and the US were engaging into serious bilateral negotiations for a bilateral free trade agreement. Once the Mexicans realized that Canada and the US were talking about free trade, quickly they wanted to join these discussions. And I arrived in Mexico just at that time. So I engaged the Mexicans at the time of this desire of them to join North America, not to leave the South American sphere of influence, but also to become a North American country. So it was what I used to call them le trilateralism. And one of the nicest souvenirs of my life is the following, Alan. One day, as a diplomat, you have to analyze and write. I decided to write a number of telegrams. In those days, there was no email, telegrams to Canada, to the top leadership in Canada about trilateralism. And the idea was that whether we liked it or not, Mexico wanted to join in. Of course, these telegrams were not very popular. The Deputy Minister of Trade, Jerry Shannon, phoned me, said, Raymond, great stuff as usual, but we don't want to hear about that. I said, Jerry, you sent me to Mexico to tell you the truth, what's going on. Whether we like it or not, Mexico will be in pretty soon. So that was some kind of pre-NAFTA days, but it allowed me to play a crucial role in the trade policy of my country.
Now, if you and I were together in the same room and having a beverage and talking, I would beg your indulgence on a couple of remembrances. I mean, first of all, when I met you in Washington, you had to go do some important work or something, and I snuck onto your balcony in that beautiful embassy that we have and could see the White House and see the Congress at either end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And I got my picture taken by your old buddy Terry Colley, and they wrote me a note on it, and that's a prized possession. So that's number one. Number two, the interview is about you and not your uncle, but I did encounter Prime Minister Jean Chrétien at a Christmas party in Ottawa one time, and I was in mid-conversation telling a grande histoire to a nice lawyer in Ottawa named Jacques Shore, and I saw the Prime Minister out of the corner of my eye, and I turned to him and I said, "I'm sorry I can't talk to you now, Prime Minister. I'm in the middle of a conversation with Jacques Shore." And he laughed and shook my hand, and I said, "Grant Sinclair had introduced us when you were at Lang Mitchner Law Firm in Toronto." And he instantly said, "Ah, yes, I appointed him to the Immigration Refugee Board. The Prime Minister makes 3,000 appointments, and he knew one." The memory of a politician. The memory of a politician.
But Alan, your comments make me reflect about this time in Washington. I arrived there in 1994 until the end of 2000 for almost 7 years. Strangely, I had two mentors in the Department of Foreign Affairs when I joined in 1966. One was Marcel Cadieux, and one was Alan Gottlieb. And these were my two mentors, who happened also to be predecessors of mine in Washington. I never thought for a minute that I would join those illustrious diplomats in the same job. But it was interesting because I was appointed to Washington by Jean Chrétien. Imagine the guts it took, for the Prime Minister of Canada just arriving in power and appointing his nephew, Raymond. Even though I was a career diplomat, even though I'd been a deputy minister in Ottawa, for Canadians, this job is by far the most important. And but we knew, both Jean and I knew that it would be a tremendous advantage to have that connection, political, but family and very personal connection. And for my whole time in Washington, Alan, it proved to be very useful. Never did the Americans doubt my ability to revert back to Ottawa what they were thinking about an issue. And I mean, that's what I call the exercise of power. I mean, I was closely connected to the Prime Minister of Canada. Bill Clinton and Al Gore gave me tremendous access, and for almost 7 years, I think it was excellent for Canada. So these were my best professional years in terms of issues of interest to all Canadians.
Well, in fact, I wonder if you recall telling me in Washington that many times when you were seeking an appointment, and of course it would have been your staff who sought the appointment, that you were mistaken for the Prime Minister of Canada because of your name.
Of course, I would, say Chrétien on the line. Quite often they thought it was Jean Chrétien, but I got through to anybody in the U.S. I didn't have to do that. When you represent Canada in Washington, as I had the honor to do for almost 7 years, the Americans listen to you, not because they like you, because it is in their interest to listen to you. Our issues are their issues. If you talk about Pacific salmon, it's a big issue for them, it's a big issue for us. If you talk about cruise missile testing over Alberta, so these are intermestic issues. We're connected, and as I was always very pleasantly surprised that I could speak to literally anybody I wanted during my time in Washington.
And you also told me that with your name and with your staff and the ability to get a meeting, you still would only get about 10 minutes with congressional leaders or the White House, etc. Tell me about how you make the most out of 10 minutes.
Listen, it's true. I always made a point because, Alan Gottlieb started this practice of really cultivating Congress. Actually, as a Canadian ambassador to Washington, you had no choice. You had to deal with the House and the Senate. My attitude was always to go in there with knowing exactly the issues I wanted to raise. And if I was given half an hour and I'd finish after 15 minutes, I would say, "Mr. Senator, thank you very much. We have had our discussion. You know where we think." And I would get out of there. The Americans are, for them, time is even more precious to them than it is for us. I kept it very short, focused, and they liked it because they would not lose time talking to you. So I established great connections. One of my good friends was John McCain. He would come to the embassy for lunch. A Republican, even though it was a Democrat administration under Bill Clinton, Pat Leahy of Vermont. when you spend as much time as I did, it was not just 3 years, it was almost 7, you develop that kind of relationship that is very useful because the people in the executive branch know that you have those contacts and they know that you're a player. So I love that. I remember one example for me that was revealing. I like to make speeches when I was there. Speeches to diffuse what I call the Canadian gospel or through. And one day I was dealing with Terry Cawley and John Higginbottom and my senior colleagues at the embassy, writing a speech. And the title was, Mr. President, some advice from a friend and neighbor, addressed to the president. That was the title of my speech. And then I was pretty tough on them on issues like Hamsburton and Cuba. And so gradually, week after week, we were drafting that speech. And at the end, my colleague said, Raymond, you cannot say that. They will throw you out. You're going too far. I said, listen, we have spent so much time on that speech, it's going to be delivered. But I got frightened at the end, so I decided to check whether or not I would be thrown out or not, whether it was too much or not. So I phoned Mac McCarthy, who was the chief of staff to President Clinton. I said, Mac, here's the situation. I'm getting ready in 3 days to make that speech. But, it's going to be tough, So I will send it to you, and if you tell me, as a friend, because he had become a friend, I will rethink my approach. So Mac said, Raymond sent it to me. I sent it to him. He phones me 12 hours later. He said, Raymond, go ahead. I said, Mac, are you certain that it's not going to... He said, Raymond, I've showed your speech to Bill Clinton. And he said, Raymond can deliver that speech. So that shows you how close the relationship was with those leaders in power. So for me, that's also the art of diplomacy. An ambassador in Washington has to be almost a politician. So you cease to be a public servant and you become, I was a very senior public servant, but you become a politician because the Americans see you as a politician. They see you as an emissary of the power of your country, not as a public servant. So I had to adapt to this new role, and I think I did pretty well.
Now, meanwhile, en même temps, the Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, was, I think, had very good personal relations with President Bill Clinton, including, if my memory serves me, at the Montebello G7 meeting, perhaps. The two of them snuck away and went for a walk together. And when they came back, the Secret Service gave President Clinton, heck, like this kind of heck, don't do that again. Is that true, or was that just, No,
it was, of course. They had an excellent relationship. When I arrived in Washington in '94, of course, Jean Chrétien had just assumed power. Very, very recently, he had to take a very difficult decision to accept the NAFTA, which he had been against until he became prime minister. So they connected early on because of their background. They were both coming from not the wealthiest parts of their country. So they had a great relationship, and it made my life easier. Also, when I presented my credentials to Clinton, just upon arrival, I didn't wait very long. The president said, listen, Mr. Chrétien, we had the regular chat, 15 minutes, talk about the issues, whatever they were then. And at the end, he called me Raymond. I said, how come you know my name, not my first name? He said, Raymond, when I saw your first nm, it reminded me of my favorite uncle in Arkansas. His name was Raymond. Therefore, till the end of my life, whenever I'll see you, it'll be Raymond. And for the rest of my assignment, wherever I was in the US, he would shout at me, Raymond. So all my colleagues were a bit jealous of this familiarity of the president. But it was an accident of diplomacy. But of course, I was, being a Chrétien when the Prime Minister of the Korea is another Chrétien was a tremendous plus for I think Canada was lucky of that conjuncture for almost 7 days, because I remember these were the golden days of the relationship. 87%, Alan, of our exports when I left Washington were going to the US. Now it's down to about 75. Of course, there's a pandemic, but it was the golden. But we had problems with the Americans. It's never easy. They are a superpower. They're wealthy. And they make you feel it. So as Canadians, we have to fight all the time, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. it's not an easy job to be in Washington. It's a difficult job.
Well, and my simple point, which you've illustrated, was that the relationship between the prime minister and the president was a benefit to the ambassador while there, and it all fed into each other. You mentioned our ambassador, Gottlieb, and folklore has it that then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney would call up Ambassador Gottlieb and say, what is the American government thinking? And Ambassador Gottlieb would say, well, which government do you mean, Prime Minister? Is it the government at Pennsylvania Avenue, in the Congress, the House, or the Senate, or perhaps the Supreme Court? So please tell us the difficulty of dealing with a multi-cameral government and a fractured and split population.
Yeah, I live this because when I remember when Newt Gingrich came into power, I mean, obviously the House was controlled by the Republicans and Clinton was a president. It became very, very difficult. I'm glad you mentioned Alan Gottlieb because Alan Gottlieb was my first boss. He was director of legal affairs. In 1966, I was a young lawyer in his division. For some reason, he took me under his wing, and he really managed my career for almost 10 days. I mean, providing me some advice. And because he became a very powerful man early on, he would say, Raymond, don't do this, don't go there, do this. I'll make sure that you get this assignment or not. It helped me a lot. So Gottlieb is the one who perhaps is the first one who played the multitude of situations very well. He's the one who started what I call the befriending Congress or visiting congressmen and senators regularly, because he understood that most of the issues of importance to Canada would be resolved in Congress not in a partisan way. If you talk about a border issue, a tax on the border for Canadians going into the U.S., and the job of the embassy is to get rid of that tax, you have to deal with senators from the border, congressmen or women of the border states, whatever they're called. You have to convince them of why you want that tax to be abolished. So you have to deal with both sides of both the House and the Senate. You mentioned the Supreme Court more rarely, because I mean the Supreme Court justices are not normally targets of diplomats. You don't visit the Supreme Court. You deal with the executive and the legislative and of course the business community. Washington is the biggest business post that we have in the world, and you deal with not only Washington, you deal with the 50 governors. When I was there, I visited about 43 states out of 50. So you deal with, whether they're Republican or Democrats, you visit them all. This is when I got to know George W. Bush, who was governor of Texas. I could tell you great stories about this man before he became president. So you have to be visible everywhere. You have to have occasionally an organized speech or presentation so that the big issues are not forgotten, or the big objectives of the years to come are understood by the other side. It's a very complex job, but a profoundly satisfying one for a diplomat. A diplomat who must have political abilities and must have communication abilities. Otherwise, you don't survive in Washington.
Now, I'm often asked, what does America think about this particular piece of public policy or initiative in Canada? And my smart aleck response is, well, America doesn't actually think about Canada very much. Before I became a consultant, I was a correspondent for the RKO radio network, and they gave me the overseas rate because the Great Lakes were between America and Canada. It was astounding what was not known. Was your major task, as some of your colleagues have described it, reminding America that we're a separate country and have a separate foreign policy?
Always, always, always. And the further down you would go in the U.S., the less they knew about us. You're right. I mean, unfortunately, Canada is not that well known. The American president doesn't wake up in the morning thinking about Canada. I mean, he has other more urgent issues to think about. Also, the American top leaders deal with what they consider crises, difficult war and peace issues, and what to do about Russia. What in the next little while, the relationship between the U.S. and China will be at the center of their preoccupations. They don't think about Canada automatically. So you have to remind them of who we are, that the countries are not linked just by 3 bridges, but they have this huge border that used to be not really defended. That's become a far more military kind of border since 9/11. Yeah, constant task of the Canadian ambassador in Washington is to go public and remind them of who we are, what Canada is all about, why Canada is a great neighbor to them. Remind them that they're lucky to have at their northern border a rich country, a socially very advanced country, more advanced than perhaps their own society, a country that has never presented a military challenge to them, a country that has been with them in the 2 world wars of the previous century. You have to remind them all the time. And the further down in the US, the more you have to do it. Of course, the closer to the northern border, the easier it was.
Now, speaking of this current election, which we've got to get around to discussing, and my being a smart aleck, I sometimes say, I'm not sure there really is a country south of us. There are certainly 50 states that are kind of conjoined somehow, and they each have a presidential election, and then they try to melt down the results. This must present some kind of a challenge to our ambassador, with cities having constitutions, states' rights, as they say, and the Supreme Court's ability, people forget, knock down much of FDR's New Deal. So we're back to the balance of power issue. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the recent elections. We know the result now. We'll see what happens in the next little while between now and November and January 20th, when President Biden will assume office with Vice President Harris. Obviously, we have seen how complicated their elections are compared to what we have in Canada. It's all organized depending upon states, various laws, various regulations. But I must say that overall, it went reasonably well. I understand there's some contestation, the judiciary calls, requests to review voting and all of that, but it went very well ultimately. But I mean, it's always a challenge for our American friends to carry elections in such a broad country with 330 million people. But I mean, it's a now big change being contemplated. I mean, their society, for me, from afar, appears divided, very exacerbated in many ways. COVID-19 is creating a huge challenge around the world, but very much in the US as well, very much in Canada as well. So the Americans have had a lot of difficulties in recent. Just think of last summer: fires in California, hurricanes in Florida, in Louisiana, and then the elections, and then pandemics, and it's the elections took place against a very stressful background. So and there we are. We will open a new chapter at the end of January. I must say that the last 4 years have produced a new NAFTA, which it took 2 years. It was very difficult. Canada and Mexico were kind of drawn almost forcibly to the table. We didn't like it, but ultimately we did. And I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland did, I think, an excellent job in managing that relationship, but it was not very warm, not always. So I think now the tone is going to change, predictability is going to come back, friendliness is going to characterize the relationship now between the two countries. President Biden knows us. His first wife had the family connections with Toronto. I mean, he came quite often when he was running the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate. Kamala Harris has been raised here, a couple of streets from here in Montreal, spent many years of her life, of her youth with us. Therefore, I understand she speaks a bit of French too. So all of that makes Canada a better known quantity with this new administration. Also, we'll see what the key cabinet secretaries are, but I hear a rumor that Susan Rice might be the next Secretary of State. You know, if that's the case, again, Susan knows Canada very well. I worked with her when I was there. She used to work with Dick Olbrich. So, I mean, if I know her, she knows us too. So, and I'm just a modest consultant right now, as you are, Alan. But all of that is an indication that Canada will have perhaps an even better access in Washington. And Alan, you're a communicator. Access in my business is gold. And I think that with this new administration, it might be easier than it has been in the last. So that's positive for Canadians at large.
I was going to interject that it's good for the world to have a Westmount High School girl in the White House as vice president. And I think people who are from Montreal will know what that means. The new ambassador, whoever is going to be our ambassador to Washington during these years, would be very well advised to call you and maybe other former ambassadors and say, what was your experience? What was it like? So please pretend you've just received that call. What would be your advice for our ambassador to Washington?
Well, first of all, I think we already have an excellent ambassador there, Kirsten Elman, as she has been appointed quite recently. So I think she did the NAFTA negotiations quite well. She was the number 2 at the embassy. I'm not convinced. I think that I'm not in the secret des dieux, as we say in French. I don't know what will happen, but she's likely to remain in C2 for quite some time. I think she's an excellent ambassador. So she knows me. I know her very well. We have a great connection. I talk with her. I guess at the moment, any ambassador in Washington keeps a low profile. During this, what I call the interregnum, during the transition, it's not the time to make your voice too loud in Washington. You keep a low profile. President Trump still has full executive powers until the end of January. So Canada has to deal with President Trump and his cabinet secretaries right now for another more than 2 months. So you keep a low profile. What you do, of course, you watch the lay of the land to see who the new key players would be at the end of January. Already, I think President Biden is going to appoint some of his key people in the next couple of days, weeks. So we will see. So you prepare the ground for what your strategies will be once they are in power, depending on who is where.
Yeah, I would be nervous about getting too close to the Biden-Harris team for fear of annoying Trump during this oddball lame duck period that America has.
You're perfectly right. So that's why I think that they are very careful. The company in Ottawa is very careful as well. So I think it's the time. But this is a difficult transition. Also, I mean, when will the transition be? Will it be a smooth one? Will it be a tough one and an arduous one? So all of these questions are in the air right now. So it's not the time to make too much noise. You keep a low profile and you hope that your hard interests are not going to be affected between now and the end of January.
So let's move from the people to the issues then, because the issues remain. What are your top of mind thoughts about defense? You already mentioned the undefended border, but I think, if I may say, I used to live very near the border in Highwater, Quebec. And when my father would go hunting, there would be a border guard to remind him he'd crossed the border and to go back. He was in America too far. So I think we've had remote sensing since the 50s, but I could be wrong. Anyway, to the point, what is your top of mind thoughts about defense, collective security, defense of North America?
Listen, first of all, if you talk about the defense of North America, you have to think the border. And the border is a big issue right now between the two countries. It's closed. I mean, I don't know when it'll be open, but it's not the border that we had when we were younger, Alan. It's highly almost militarized. You've got drones overseeing the border. I mean, border guards now have guns. In the old days, you didn't have that. So the reopening of the border is a big issue. Now, in terms of overall security, it'll be interesting to see. NORAD remains an important forum for Canada and the US. I guess this year is the 75th anniversary of NORAD. Great connection there. The number 2 in the Cheyenne Mountain is a Canadian. I suspect, again, that the defense budget of Canada is always an issue. When I was in Washington from 94 till the end of 2000, with the Clinton administration, I was always surprised that quite often, regularly, my American friends would say, why are you allowing your army to go from 115 to 95 to 75? The Americans are perhaps the only country in the world that wants its neighbors to be military powerfully strong. So the pressure that President Trump has put upon Canada and all the NATO partners. Remember, yes, he has indicated that he wanted the military budget to go to 2% for us all. I suspect that somehow this will continue to play in terms of defense and security issues between our two countries. But it's listen, the answer is always the same. We're increasing slowly, but clearly we cannot rely on automatic American support as we used to during the two world wars or in between during the Soviet Union's time.
And we don't talk or even think much about the Organization of American States, the OAS, but that's our hemispheric alignment. Any thoughts on that with vis-a-vis South America?
Listen, yeah, Canada has always paid a lot of attention to the OAS, as we say in English. But again, this is not as powerful an organization as NATO would be, for instance. We're there, we're playing a role, but you don't hear about the OAS every day. I guess the big change of the last 25 years in terms of has been the addition of Mexico as a North American entity, not just a South American entity. North America is now 3 countries, not 2. It's clearly Canada, US, and Mexico. Mexico that is far more in the northern sphere of influence than it was before the NAFTA days. So we'll see where Latin America fits into the Biden agenda. I suspect that for President-elect Biden, he will not revisit the shift of American policy towards Asia done by the Obama administration when he was vice president. This will remain, but I suspect that he will want to reestablish a stronger, closer connection with Europe, with NATO, with the traditional allies of the US, Germany, France, Japan. Europe will become more present in his mind because of who he is and because of his past and because of his age. You know, here's a man who has understood, who has lived the consequences of the 2 world wars. So I suspect that there will be more attention being given to Europe also. But I'm very happy that I think for us, our selfish interests as Canadians are going to be served as well by him. But I mean, we'll see. The big issue for the US is China.
You know, I was going to jump in and say you are so diplomatic and so kind in your recollection of our meeting and so on that if I say something ridiculous, I think you'll smooth it over. But I was going to say, aren't we on the cusp of, or even in, a new kind of Cold War with relations with Russia and China? And if we're trying to bring back the supply chain and not depend on China as much and be as critical as President Trump has been of China, this is both potentially empowering, but also potentially very dangerous. Could I call this a new kind of Cold War?
Listen, first of all, before we talk about war, Cold Wars, hot wars, there's no doubt that the relationship between the US and China is going to dominate their thinking in the next couple of years, as it has in the last few years. You know, there has been a trade war launched by President Trump. I suspect that the trade difficulties between the US and China are not over. Are we? What is China to the US? The US leaders. First of all, there's very little disconnect between Republicans and Democrats about China. Both sides are realizing that they have a new challenger on the horizon, and it's called China. Is China just a friendly competitor? No longer. I think it might have been a friendly competitor, but it has passed that. Has it become an adversary? Certainly. Has China become an enemy? Probably not. In the minds of some, yes. So, but this issue is out there. But a Cold War with China is difficult to imagine if you compare the situation between the US and the old Soviet Union. The economic links, trade links between China and the US are so many times more important than what you had between the Soviet Union and the US that I would hesitate to call it a Cold War right now. But it's out there. I mean, the tensions are rising between the two countries. Clearly, Xi Jinping wants to get rid of the Americans in this part of the world. The Americans are subsidizing now Taiwan in terms of military equipment. The Chinese are not happy. There's nervousness in that part of the world, and it will have to be. And also, remember, China's economy is going to surpass the American economy pretty soon. The military apparatus of China is really increasing in quality and importance. I mean, they're not yet in a position to challenge American military superiority, but they're getting there. So it's getting tense. And look at what they're doing in space. I mean, what they have done with the moon. I mean, there's a great fear in Washington that the Chinese are going to be the first to put a man on Mars. So if this were to happen, that would really crystallize their minds. But this is a big issue for Canada. The US-China connection is hugely important for Canada. You know why? Because of the two Michaels. You know, the American request to extradite Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, has resulted in a very, very great tension between Canada and China. It has never been as bad as it is right now. And until now our trial is taking place in Vancouver. I understand that the Prime Minister has raised the issue yesterday with President-elect Biden. This issue is hugely important for us because, I mean, China is our second most important trading partner. So if things go wrong with China, we pay a price. We pay a price in terms of our exports of canola, export of pork to China. So it's a huge issue. And also in Canada right now, and I don't like to see this, but some of the latest polls indicate that almost 40% of Canadians would like to see Canada breaking up relations with China. This is huge. Almost 80% of Canadians want China to be want Canada not to rely as much on China for our trade. So these are very illustrative of the tensions now between Canada and China, caused partly by this American request for extradition. So here I think President Biden will be less, perhaps will be, his tone is different. He has indicated already publicly that he wants to talk to Xi Jinping more often, using multilateral fora like APEC, perhaps to talk with. Maybe he can help us with the two Michaels, get them out of jail, because soon it'll be 2 years that they've been there.
Well, that's a sad and an important issue. For some reason, Henry Kissinger is coming to my mind because his geopolitical thinking may have paralleled yours in a way. There was at least some thought during the Trump years that Trump needed the old Soviet Union, Russia now, as a quasi-ally in order to put China in its place. What are your views of the chess pieces Russia, America, China in this new world order?
It's very interesting. It's a huge question in terms of what I call the forces at play in the world. What is clear, and Mr. President-elect Biden has already indicated that he's going to take a different attitude, tougher attitudes toward Russia. He has alluded to more sanctions against Russia. So this relationship is going to become also more difficult to manage. And clearly, also because he's a man of his generation, of his background, Russia has always been, or the old Soviet Union, the enemy. So I suspect that things are going to be more difficult between the US and Russia.
I note the sign of your law firm behind you, Fasken, and that's a legitimate product placement. But I also note that you're in demand as a speaker. You were in other boardrooms earlier and you made time to speak with me, and I appreciate that. But I also notice that maybe you're editing yourself as you're speaking. Are you occasionally worried that you say something that makes the news and the headline is that Canada's former ambassador to America says X, Y, or Z? Does that worry you?
No, not really. I mean, listen, I've been out of this circuit for a very long time. I'm citizen Raymond right now. I'm just I have no connections, and I'm not part of the. So I tell it the way I see it right now. I try to be well informed, but who cares about what I think?
Now that's a good way to think. This conversation that we've had is in a way an excellent and unique briefing for the people watching about Canada-US relations and the election and the transition of power, and thank you again for that. But if I were your subordinate, and that's all I could have been, of course, in the diplomatic corps, and had constructed this briefing, you might say to me, but Alan, you've forgotten some important things. You must put the following into that briefing. What did I forget? What do you want to talk about? Please correct me.
No, I would just say that today, as we speak, I'm reassured and confident about the relationship between Canada and the US for the next 4 years. I think that the stars are aligning themselves in a positive way. I know how the government in Ottawa is already looking forward in an organized fashion, think about what are the issues, what are the issues that they will have to fight in the next couple of years. So I feel relaxed and confident. So that's what I would like to leave you with, Alan. Also, for me, it was an opportunity to reminisce about the old times in Washington. For me, it's 25 years ago. The world has changed. The US have changed dramatically. I love my time in Washington. It's once you have lived in Washington, you never cease to be highly interested in this amazing country. I feel that quite often people ask me, Raymond, after 7 years in Washington, almost 7 years in Washington, how do you feel about us being closer geographically? My answer is usually the following. Listen, I find we have lucky to be living next to the richest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, a country with which we have so much trade that our quality of life, our standard of living depends very much upon that relationship. They are a huge cultural power. We watch their media, so we're lucky to have them as neighbors. They might have their faults. We have our own faults. In retrospect, also quite often the Americans will tell me, listen, you're Canadian. We're lucky that you're there. We're lucky to have you as neighbors. I guess Americans realize that we're only 35 million people, but I think I've mentioned it before. We're a wealthy country. We're a country where we have our internal problems, but we're not a divided country. We're very socially developed. I mean, imagine the tens of millions would like to have just a healthcare system the way we have it. They benefit from us being their partners in war and peace issues. Most of the time, we agree. So it's a win-win situation now. I would like to leave you with this: Canada and US, it's a win-win situation.
I agree. 3 ways to say goodbye. First, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Very nostalgic to speak with you again, and I'm pleased that you remember my visit to Washington to see you. That's number 1. Deuxièmement, merci bien, Monsieur Chretien. Ça me fait grand plaisir. And thirdly, muchas gracias por su tiempo. Espero verlo pronto nuevamente.
Alan, muchas gracias. Hasta luego.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.